Okay, so um, we're going to start looking at what the rabbis uh, did with prayer today. We're going to start taking a look at what the rabbis said is. Oh, you're okay, Leah. My microphone is okay. That's fine. We're gonna, type things into the chat, and I will keep an eye on those. People are coming in. Okay, hi Bounds. Hi everybody. Okay, so this is, I'm really excited about class today because this is stuff that I'm pulling together into, a presentable form that you're sort of helping me pull some stuff into presentable form that I've been reading for the last couple of years and have been thinking about, but I'm finally kind of figuring out how to tell you about it. I'm still waiting a couple of minutes just to see if other people come in. But what I've been reading are two of the most important people who I'll be drawing from. One is a professor at Brandeis University, yes, Carol, our own alma mater, named Ruvain Kimmelman, who has written so extensively about the Amida and the Shema and the prayer book, not about the prayer book in general, but he's really traced back where a lot of these pieces come from. And another person is the other person who I'm reading a lot of is, his name is Stefan Reif. And I met him on my very first sabbatical a very, very long time ago. I guess this would have been 93 in Cambridge. And he was in charge at that time of the Cairo Geniza that's it belongs in the library of Cambridge University, specifically St. John's College. And I will talk a little bit about the Cairo Geniza as we move forward. We're going to look at some of our sources. But I actually met him long, long before I knew that I was going to be working in any kind of scholarly way on sources from that period. So it's kind of cool that I have connections to him. Okay, so let's get started. So what we're going to do today is start to take a look at what did the rabbis decide is obligatory practice that turns into the organizing of religious prayer in the Siddur. So there were three things that are like the bottom line obligatory stuff. One is saying the Shema, morning and evening every day. One is Torah reading, okay? And so Torah was being read on Mondays, Thursdays, and on Shabbat and festivals. And oops, let me let in some more. Okay. So when we look at what was considered obligatory by the rabbis, the Shema, we think, was already being said during the time that the Second Temple was standing, that was already a practice. And we know that Torah reading was already happening because that seems to have been put in place by Ezra and Nehemiah, who are, associated with even the rebuilding of the Second Temple. So we don't know how long Torah reading was going on, but there seems to have been a long practice, even with the triennial cycle that we use in Agudas. That's how they seem to have been reading the Torah. And so one of the things that is interesting about this is that the big reform, let's say, when the Second Temple was built, was to put a lot more attention on the texts. So, as I said last time, those texts were connected with Deuteronomy and what's called the Deuteronomistic history, which is the books that come right after the Torah in the Hebrew Bible. And remember, please, please, please type in questions into the chat when I start doing things that are whooshing by too quickly. So in the Tanakh, we have the Torah, then we have the books of prophets, and the first ones of those are Joshua, and then Samuel, First Samuel, Second Samuel. So First Samuel we've looked at, which is the story of Hannah and her practice, and then David is introduced in Second Samuel, and then we get First Kings, and we looked at Kings last time because that's where Solomon, inaugurates the Second Temple, and the First Temple and all of its practices. And then there's the, a long line of kings that we get in the books of Kings, all the way through the ones that where the First Temple is destroyed, the kingdom split into Judah and Israel, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and the northern kingdom, gets destroyed and disappears. But there's all of those kings that are going through there and what happens thereafter. Okay, and then towards the end of the Second Temple period is the period that I was talking about last time, where there was the temple in Jerusalem, there were different sects of Judaism, and there was a lot of ferment in the entire area. But the important point for what we're talking about now is that this period, there seems to have been a practice of saying the Shema daily, morning and evening, and doing these Torah readings. So the daily prayer, the practice of daily prayer, I think anyway, was a big innovation that the rabbis introduced. There was also, I'm going to talk about sources in a minute, there was also daily prayer at Qumran, which is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were. So they weren't the first ones to do something that looked like daily prayer, but the sources that we have and the scholars who I'm relying on are, they are pushing back against the temptation to say that the Amida, the prayer services that the rabbis inaugurated, there's this very, very strong temptation to try to put the Siddur in the hands of the people who were in the Second Temple period, and even Moses. So there's this really strong yearning to say, even Moses was saying the Amida. No, he wasn't. There's no way that, So they want to push it as far back as they can. And a lot of Orthodox scholars in Israel, people who are particularly ones who are rabbis themselves or who went through, a lot of yeshiva training with a lot of Talmudic practice, they tend to be the ones who want to argue for a really early date for the Amida and the daily prayer practice, whereas the ones who are, have a little bit more scholarly objectivity say, well, probably not. Okay, so the first thing that we want to say about daily prayer is that there is a very early piece in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, which is the oldest part of the Talmud, that says it is incumbent on everyone to pray 3 times a day. And I keep hesitating over that because it was initially twice a day, and then a third service got added in. It was controversial. It was the Ma'ariv service. And what constitutes praying is saying the Amida. Okay, so even though this service, as we're going to see in 1 second, incorporates the Shema, saying the Shema only fulfills the obligation to say the Shema. It does not fulfill the obligation to pray. That's a kind of separate thing. Oops. Okay. So, oh, we still have some people coming in. That's great. Hi, everybody. Okay, so if you just came in, we've just gone through that. What seems to be obligatory early on is saying the Shema and doing Torah reading, but the rabbis inaugurate an obligation to pray 3 times a day, and the only thing that fulfills that obligation is saying the Amida. And so what we can start with is just to talk about, if you pray 3 times a day, then shouldn't you have to? No. Okay, saying the Shema, there's an obligation to say the Shema, and that obligation is stated in the Shema itself. Okay, these words that I'm putting in your mouth, meditate on them night and day, speaking of them when you go out, when you come in, when you lie down, and when you rise up. Okay, so that obligation is in the Torah. All right. So to fulfill that obligation, we need to say the Shema. Okay, and there's no actual law that says we have to read the Torah, which is interesting, but we do. It was a practice that was instituted by Ezra and Nehemiah. There's nothing that says you must read the Torah, but it's taken as an important obligation. Okay. So what I want to bring in, early on, I don't remember exactly what I said happened early on, but so who is it who says that we have to pray what came to be known as the Amida? It seems to be early on, meaning like the 1st century in the Common Era, and it's attributed to Hillel, to Rabbi Gamliel, and so some of the very early Tannaitic people who wrote the Mishnah, okay, who started the commentary that became the Mishnah. And I'm going to go through some of those sources in a minute. Before we get there, what I want to do is just think about what we call this prayer, okay? We call it the Amida. The word Amida means standing, okay? La'amod is to stand, okay? So Amida is standing up. And so the standing prayer, it is the prayer that we stand for, okay? And it is also known as the Shmona Esrei. When I was growing up, we always called it the Shmona Esrei. And the words Shmona Esrei mean 18. Okay, Shmona Esrei is 18. So the word Chai is referring to 18. It's that number. Okay, and Shmona is 8 and Esrei is teen. Okay, so it's the 18 blessings, but it doesn't have 18 blessings. It actually has 19, and we're going to talk about that. So what they instituted was that, and we're going to talk about what happens to the number 18, but the rabbis also refer to it as hatfilah. Hatfilah. When they say hatfilah, they are referring to the Amida. And tefillah is prayer. So when they use hatfilah, the prayer, right, that's because that is the prayer that fulfills the obligation to pray. Nothing else is required. Okay? Nothing else is required but the prayer. All you have to do is say the prayer. Okay? So let me get back over here. So what we're doing is thinking about, oops, I have to find my mouse. Okay, here we go. If we look at an outline of the service, of religious services, okay, here are the three services: the evening service, Ma'ariv, the morning service, Shacharit, and the addition, oh, this doesn't have Mincha. I don't know why. That's weird. Okay, but some of you who go to, all right, I need a different slide. I need to fix this. So the third, this is giving you the Musaf service, which is on Shabbat and holidays, but it doesn't have the Mincha service. Okay, but those of you who go to Minyan, you'll know, all right? The difference between the Ma'ariv service, which is in the evening, and the Mincha service, which is in the afternoon, is that the Mincha service does not include the Shema. The evening service does include the Shema, okay? But the Mincha service has the Shmona Esrei and the Aleinu, okay? The morning service has morning blessings and Pesukei de Zimra, which are basically just warm-up exercises. They are, because everything becomes obligatory, we now consider them obligatory, but they don't fulfill any commandment whatsoever, okay? The Shema is required to be said in the morning, and the Shmona Esrei, okay? Those are the required pieces. It has become customary to say Hallel, and Hallel, it turns out, seems to have been compiled also. When I say very early, I'm going to say very early, there seems to be evidence that Hallel was said in the temple service as part of the temple practice for holidays and some other things. So Hallel is a selection of like 6 Psalms from the last book of Psalms. It's like 115 to 118, 19, or whatever. I'm not going to try to be accurate about that. But that grouping of sequential Psalms becomes Hallel, and it was chanted very early, but there's not a commandment for it, and it doesn't fulfill an obligation, okay? We just do it when it's necessary. We read Torah, and then these things are sort of the closing, you know, nice way to sort of come down from the, you know, heights of our prayer and finish up. And they're also more or less optional, okay? The Musaf is an additional service. So what does it mean to have an additional service? It means to have the Shmona Esrei. In other words, if you're going to have a service, you're going to say the Amida. That's what a service is, okay? And so on Yom Kippur, when we have, you know, this service and that service and the other service, we're saying the Shmona Esrei. We are saying the Amida over and over and over and over. That is what it means to pray. Okay. So those are the pieces that are obligatory, and all the rest is either warming up or letting down. Okay. Questions? Oh, thank you, Leah. So Hallel is 113 to 118, and it's broken up in some interesting ways, and some pieces are said out loud and some are not. Okay, so pages and pages and pages of Talmud are, okay, can I please say again what is in that last word? I don't know what that means. What is in?
Marav? Is it Marav?
Oh, Ma'ariv, Ma'ariv, okay. Ma'ariv is the evening service. The word Ma'ariv means west, and it is where the sun sets. So that is the evening service. And so basically, that is what we do on Friday night. that is what we do Erev holidays. And if you go to Daily Minyan, here at Agudas, we do Ma'ariv when it is late enough. Maybe Melanie can tell us. We're doing Ma'ariv now at the Daily Minyan, is that right? Or we can't be doing Mincha, are we? We're doing Mincha because we do that Minyan at 6, so we're doing Mincha, is that right? Somebody help me. Okay, yes, Leah is nodding. Okay, so Mincha is the afternoon service. So Ma'ariv we're supposed to be doing later when it's closer to sunset, okay? Because it is the evening service, but it is also the service for the day that is just starting. So the day doesn't start until sundown. So Kabbalat Shabbat and the evening service is what starts Shabbat. And so Ma'ariv on Friday night starts the day of Sabbath, okay? And so you do it evening and morning, you say the Shema, okay? So we do it evening and morning on Shabbat. Okay, but any service is going to contain the evening service contains the Shema and the Shemona Esrei. The morning service contains the Shema and the Shemona Esrei. The Mincha service, the afternoon service, only contains the Shemona Esrei. It does not include the Shema. Okay, so Mike is saying, in Deuteronomy, it mentions 4 times when you sit at your home, when you walk on your way, when you lie down, when you rise up. Okay, so the two, in your house and on the way, they're sort of, the Shema is interesting, it has opposites. So it's supposed to really be meditating on them all the time. It's sort of like when we say from A to Z, we're doing it all the time, because it's also saying teach them diligently to your children and talk about them and so on. So it's not like 4 separate times, but it got taken that way. So it's supposed to be something, because when you kiss the mezuzah on your way in the house or on the way out of the house, you're meditating, you're thinking about the Shema. Okay, so it's supposed to be constant. It's sort of like when we think about the Ner Tamid. Okay, so I'm digressing here a little bit. The Ner Tamid is the light that we have, the constant eternal light. And so in our sanctuary and in our chapel, we have an eternal light. It turns out that the word Tamid doesn't mean eternal, it means regular. And so they used to light the lamp in the morning and in the evening, but it comes on to this eternal thing. Okay, so there's this sort of, is it twice or is it all the time? So it's not like the 4 times mentioned in the Shema are 4 occasions. It's supposed to be constant, but it turned into a twice. Okay, well, if we do it in the morning and we do it in the evening, that at least is institutionalizing that we're doing it frequently, something like that. Okay. Melanie, because we keep evening minyan at the same time all year, we switch services when the sun is setting. Right. Okay. So when we're on a time frame where it's getting dark at 6 or 5 or 4:30 or 3 or whatever, the service that's appropriate to do at 6 o'clock is Ma'ariv. And when sun doesn't set until 8 or 9, and now that we're in July, it's the times are shrinking again. We're doing Mincha in the afternoon, Mincha at 6 o'clock, because sunset will be a couple of hours later. Okay, so you get the idea of what counts as obligatory prayer. Okay, why the same prayer at every service? Because the Shemona Esrei is the prayer. For the rabbis, praying means saying the Shemona Esrei. It does not mean all of the other things that it meant in the Hebrew Bible. So this is the important point. They do not count saying a psalm as praying. They do not count lying in bed at night and praying that you don't get COVID as praying. That does not count for them as prayer. It's not that they don't think it is prayer, but what they're saying is it does not fulfill the obligation to pray. And what we're talking about today is that the rabbis are transforming prayer into a set of blessings. We're moving, and I'm going to just move back up a little bit because when I was thinking about how to start today, I was thinking about this thing that we looked at last time from Solomon's dedication of the first temple. Okay, and the point I was making then is that we have these petitions, invocation, and these 7 petitions that we looked at that were saying things like, if, an Israelite gets into trouble with another Israelite and they swear and they're accusing each other and they come to the temple and they pray to you, answer their prayer and give them what they deserve. That's what these petitions are. And so, I should also say that what a petition is asking God to intervene and do something, give us rain, or, take away the plague, or, defeat my enemies, vindicate me. Those are petitions. And petitions are a regular part of any prayer. Okay? In a Thanksgiving prayer, we say, thank you for granting my request. In a complaining or petitionary or lament prayer, we say, please do this thing. Okay, that is characteristic of a prayer in the Hebrew Bible. Okay? Blessings are not characteristically part of prayer in the Hebrew Bible. Prayer in the Hebrew Bible is invoking God by name, having petitions, invoking God again, and normally to make some kind of promise, to praise God, okay? And I didn't spell that out when we were talking about biblical prayer, but those are kind of the pieces of it, okay? And that is prayer, okay? And then it's kind of interesting that Solomon changes his stance before doing those, and then he changes his stance again, and then he blesses the congregation. So there's kind of a break between these petitions and the blessings. Okay. What I'm going to try and get across today is that the huge innovation that the rabbis do, and it's huge, and it's new, more or less new, is that they make the blessing the crucial part of the prayer. It's the blessing that becomes the key part. And they connect it sometimes to petitions. Okay, we're going to get to this because we're going to look at this a little bit more closely, so that a blessing and a petition becomes prayer. And, okay, the 18, when we talk about the Shemona Esrei, okay, what are the 18 things of? What are there 18 of? There are 18 blessings. There are 18 blessings. Okay. All right, I'm going to come back to, okay, so are we going to look at differences in the Shemona Esrei? Yes, in a minute. And does the Ma'ariv have to be said by, yes. Okay, so the Talmud, there are pages and pages and pages of Talmud that are devoted to when are you allowed to say the Shema, okay? If it gets, if you oversleep and it's this time, are you just out of luck? You can't say the Shema anymore. Yes, okay? And, when do you have to say it? How late can you say the Shema? So the rabbis worried about that a lot, okay? That's what a lot of the Talmud is how do we observe Shabbos? How do we observe Purim? And so on and so forth. So the bottom line is that what the rabbis count as prayer is saying the Amida, because that's what they say we are obliged to do three times a day. Okay, we are obliged to say the Amida 3 times a day. And we're going to get to this much later. They also say that it is incumbent not only for individuals, but for the community. Now, what that means is there needs to be a place in which minions are taking place, in which the community says it as a community. We can only say the Amida in its communal form, that is, out loud, if there's a minion. Okay? So you need 10 people, and that allows you to do it communally. If you don't have 10 people, you say it individually. But you don't have to be in the synagogue to say it individually. People who don't go to the synagogue can say it at home. Okay? And I remember growing up, when my Orthodox grandfather used to visit, he would say it at home, and he would put his tallis over his head, and he would stand there, and he was doing the morning service by himself at home. You do not have to go to the synagogue to fulfill your daily obligation to pray. Okay, you do not have to do it at a minyan in the synagogue, but it is incumbent on communities to have communal services where people can go and be part of the minyan or part of the service to do it. And I am going off track a little bit here, but the part where you say it out loud, the difference between saying it out loud and saying it silently is whether it contains the Kedusha. The Kedusha, which is praising God's name. And I'm going to have a later class where we talk about that, because I have more stuff that I want to sort of cover today, and maybe, I mean, we'll see. If we don't cover everything, we'll just keep going. But in order to say the Kedusha and to say it out loud, to have the prayer leader say the Amida out loud, including the Kedusha, you have to have 10 people. Okay, and that having the prayer leader say it out loud, including the Kedusha, fulfills the communal obligation. But even in a service, a communal service, it has to be said both by the individuals and by the prayer leader in the communal form. So if you have not said the Amida at home, if you go to services in order to fulfill your daily obligation, that's why we do the silent reading of the Amida, and then it's followed by the prayer leader saying it out loud. That's what fulfills the double. So it's not just that we say it 3 times a day. If we're doing it in shul, we're actually doing it 6 times a day, because we have done it ourselves silently, and then we hear it again when it's done communally. All right, so this is repeated, 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 repeated. Okay, let's take a look. I'm going to move forward a little bit. Okay, so we've talked about the outline of the service. So here's the Shemona Esrei in the evening service, the Shemona Esrei in the morning service. Oh, and on Shabbat and holidays, it's 8 times, because we're doing the same thing with the communal and the individual in the Musaf service. All right. What does the Amida contain? Okay, so this is going to get at your question about, is it different? Okay, so here it is. I can't fit it all onto the page. So I want to just show you, I liked this version of it in the, this is on a Chabad website. If you want to go look at the Chabad thing, it's basically, if you type in Chabad, what is the Amida, you'll get to this page. And what it does is it lists out what the theme of each of these is, but each one is a blessing. Okay, we have 18 or 19 blessings. Okay, so we have 3 praise blessings, 1, 2, 3. So this is the opening where we say, God, who is the, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, bless God, the shield of Abraham, and then we add the one who pays attention to Sarah. And then we have the prayer that's the resurrection of the dead, and then we praise God's as holy, okay? Those are the first 3 blessings. The last 3 and those are being labeled here as praise. The last 3 blessings are gratitude and thanks, okay? And so this is a blessing where we say, restore the holy temple and its service, thanking God for keeping us alive. And this is the Sim Shalom, or the blessing for peace. That's the last blessing of the Amida. Everything after that, and Sigrid asked about this a couple of weeks ago, which is the blessing that we say, the God, guard my tongue from evil and my lips. That is just kind of a nice thing that got tacked on by somebody. It is not part of the Amida. Okay. So there's this accretion, all right? So let's take a look at what's in the middle, okay? And let's just count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So did I count them right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So 13 and 6 is 19. It is not 18. Okay, so they called the Amida the Shmona Esrei, which means the 18 blessings, but there's 19. So the Chabad follow mythology, okay, that says that this blessing it's called minim, about enemies, was added. That is not correct. There's a lot of scholarly evidence that this blessing was very early. So I can tell you a story. The scholar whose argument I think is the most plausible says that where we got 19 is that there were 2 different ways, 3, of praying for peace, and that the Sim Shalom, so the prayer Sim Shalom, we have 2 versions of it. In the evening service, we do Shalom Rav, and it's short, Shalom Rav, right? And in the morning service, we do the whole big Sim Shalom, okay? And so there's 2 versions of it. But there's another difference, which is that if we have a minyan, we also have the blessing of the Kohanim that is added in, the priestly blessing, which is, the Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, and so on, the last blessing of which is a prayer for peace, which is, Oseh Shalom b'mromav hu yaseh Shalom, okay, is the third blessing is Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yifunecha. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yaseh lecha shalom. Okay, so it's a prayer for peace. And so the person who I find most plausible is saying that the Sim Shalom prayer was written and inserted in services where the priestly blessing wasn't said. because it's not said in all of these. I think it's not said in the evening or something like that. So they said, well, we should still have a prayer for peace. So they put this peace prayer in, and then they decided that even if the priests were saying the priestly blessing or the prayer leader was saying the version of the priestly blessing that we say when we're not doing it with the Kohanim, that we should say both. So there's actually two prayers for peace. And it's just because they wanted to make sure that that prayer didn't get lost. They put it in the service, it got kept, and so we ended up with 19. Okay. So I'm going to come back to Michael's question in 1 minute. So when does the Amida contain these 18 or 19 blessings? That's in the daily minyan. The daily minyan has 18 or 19 blessings. So if you don't tend to go to daily minyan, you might not have any idea that there are any of these blessings. Why? Because on Shabbat, all of these blessings are replaced with one blessing that talks about Shabbat. And if it's a holiday, if it's a holiday that is not Shabbat, if it is a holiday that is not Shabbat, all of these blessings are replaced with one blessing that talks about the festival. Okay, so there are only 7 blessings. There are only 7 blessings. And something that is kind of interesting then, so the 7 are these 3, okay, that we say. We always say these, which is the start, the shield of Abraham, resurrecting the dead, and God is holy. And these thank yous, restoring the temple, keeping us alive, and the prayer for peace. And whichever middle one, okay, we do. Okay, Mike, why 3 times versus 2 times versus 5 times? Why do we say the Amida? Why do we pray 3 times a day? Why do we have 3 prayer services? Is that the question? It was controversial. I think that 2 were obvious. That there were going to be 2 was obvious because we said the Shema twice a day and because we had the Olah sacrifice twice a day. Okay? We probably had the Olah sacrifice twice a day because we said the Shema twice a day. Who knows? But the one communal sacrifice that was done every day, the huge important one that was required was doing that daily, it was called the Holocaust sacrifice. It was the cow or the sheep that got burned up completely. Nobody got to eat any of the meat at all. That was the big sacrifice of the day. And so when the temple got destroyed, and the Shema apparently was said during temple period twice a day, probably around the time that they were doing the Olat HaTamid, the daily sacrifice. They probably said, somebody was saying the Shema, okay? So twice was obvious. The third one seems to have been part of this dispute about whether you should have, so as I said last time, and Alex, I don't know if Alex is here today, but anyway, adding the evening service around the Shema there was an argument about which are the 2 times where it should be obligatory. Should it be within the same sunrise, sunset, sunrise, or should it be the evening, morning, and afternoon? Shouldn't we have an evening one where we say the Shema because we're saying it in the evening, morning, afternoon? So I think that having 3 instead of 2 was the compromise. And what's interesting is that when Islam, okay, Islam came to be seen as the true story that draws from both Judaism and Christianity. I think they pray 5 times a day. So they do their service 5 times a day. Okay. And it begins, their 5 services begin with a call to worship. And what is the call to worship? Is the Baruch Hu. Okay. So the Baruch Hu is not a prayer that is required to be said. It's just, come on, guys, come, because we need to say these prayers. It does not, it becomes an obligatory part of the service, but strictly speaking. Oh, and if we go back to this, when do we say the Baruch Hu? We say the Baruch Hu in the evening, and we say the Baruch Hu in the morning. It is not part of the Musaf service, and it is not part of the Mincha service. Okay, correct? Those of you who lead these services? Okay. So 2 or 3, there seems to have been some conflict over it. Okay. So now what I'm saying here is I want to say that the rabbis come to identify prayer with blessing, because the Amida, Hatfilah, the prayer that fulfills the daily obligation to pray, is 18 blessings. Okay, and so let me go back to this. It's 18 blessings, of which these are petitions. Okay, so if we kind of think about this in terms of how does this relate back to Hebrew Bible prayer, we can think of this kind of praise as an invocation of God, okay? And lots of prayers, most prayers address God by name and by talking about God's relationship to the person who is praying, which we have with Abraham, and God's might, right? God's holiness, God's abilities. That is a very common thing for prayer, okay? Not necessarily in the form of blessings in prayer, but okay. How do prayers end? We invoke God again. And oftentimes what we do is thank God at the end, or promise to thank God. Promise to thank God, promise to praise God. That's what happens at a lot of the endings of prayers in the Hebrew Bible. And in the middle are petitions. Why do we not have these on Shabbat? Because the rabbis say it's the day of rest. We shouldn't be asking God to do things for us on the day of rest. Okay? So that's why all these petitions are left out. It's kind of bizarre because plenty of these blessings that we have all the way through do ask God to do things, but those 7. Okay, so let me one more time say that when I say that saying the Amida is what the rabbis count as prayer, okay, this starts with the Amida, but then it expands because there are things that become, that have blessings in them that look like prayers that we say from the moment we wake up in the morning through we are falling asleep at night. There are prayers for every single thing that we see, that we do, that we think about. These are blessings that we say. And one of the arguments I'm going to make over the next few sessions is that actual prayer that an individual has for his or her specific situation on that day, on whatever day that they're going, that they want to pray, gets squeezed out. It gets squeezed out gradually. We're going to talk about how that happens, but it gets squeezed out. And those of you who conduct morning minyan, those of you who go to daily minyan, one of the places when it got squeezed out of the Amida, there used to be places for it in the Amida. We're going to talk about that. It got squeezed out of the Amida. They developed what is called Tachanun. Tachanun was the place it was supposed to be where, oh, you want to say some prayers on your own to God? Now that we've invoked God, God is listening, God is already ramped up, ready to listen. Go ahead and say your personal prayers. Tachanun was the place. But then, because there were texts, oh, you don't know what to say? Here are some texts. Those prayers got fixed. We sing this during Tachanun. We say this during Tachanun. They got squeezed out of Tachanun as well. Okay, so this is a dynamic that happens over and over and over in the history of the Siddur, that places where prayer might be spontaneous, or you might use a prayer that reflects your current situation, there was room for it. Somebody said, oh, you don't know what to pray, here's a text, and then it gets amalgamated in, and it becomes part of our service that we think we need to say every single time, and that's how the prayer book grew. Okay. Barbara, I agree with you that, God, what we're saying about it is that God is observing Shabbat as well as us, but we don't know for sure whether God observes Shabbat. God might, it's fine if God wants to. But what we're doing is remembering all the work that God did in creating the world in a week. He's not doing, she is not doing that all the time. So I don't know. We don't know. And Sigrid says, okay, the Kedusha, so there are differences between the evening prayers and the morning prayers. Yes, there are some variations. So, the Kedusha we're going to talk about. There's also things that get added. Okay, so if you think about the services that we do on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, there are all these things that get added into the Amida. So yes, it's not exactly the same prayer, but the three blessings at the beginning and the three blessings at the end are always the same. Oh, well, no, since the Shalom prayer is not always exactly the same. So anyway, so let's see. In terms of timing, we're not going to be able to do everything that I wanted to do today, which is fine. We'll just pick up with this next time. But what I want to start with, and then I open it up and have more people just, okay, what is blowing your mind? I would like to know what's blowing your mind on this. I'm going to ignore my phone. But these are the things that I want to bring in. That what constitutes a blessing for the rabbis, okay? And so I'm going to show you a couple of things. And I want to say that what constitutes a blessing is also an innovation of the rabbis. That what counts as a blessing is a new thing that the rabbis, pulling from different traditions, bring in, okay? And there are three things about it. One is blessing God's name, okay, which is Shem. Shem is the word for name. Talking about God as king, And this becomes very characteristic of prayer, rabbinic prayer. And then creating a formula in which we say, talk about God in second person. Blessed are you, God, Baruch Atah Adonai. And in the same blessing, talking about God in third person. So let's see some examples. Oh, let me jump past this. We're not going to spend time on this today. I just want to show you. Okay, here is that complete formula. Okay, and I've just copied in here. You can find this in any Shacharit service. You can find this. This is like in the, this is like, I don't know, some page 10 or something in the Sim Shalom. But the important point here is this is the formula that we say for almost all of our blessings. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Okay, Baruch atah, blessed are you, God, our God, King of the world. Okay, so here is the king element of it. All right, and the name element, let me see where this is. Here. Okay, this turns out to be in the Shema. This thing is very curious, and this is a very big thing. This looks innocuous. We don't pay much attention to it, but this is huge. And because it is interrupting the Shema and the Ve'ahavta, okay, we stick this thing in here. We say it silently for most of the year, and you all know when we say it out loud is on Yom Kippur. Okay, we're going to talk about why. Okay, and it's a very, there's a lot to this. Okay, but the thing to notice is Baruch, blessed be the name. Baruch, blessed be God's name and God's kingdom forever. And these elements of the foreverness, I'm sorry I don't have the translation right here. I have this, we'll talk about it more next time. But this, this combination of blessing and the name and the kingdom and forever, those are all important pieces of blessings for the rabbis. Okay, so let me go back and say, I don't really want to talk about the sources. Okay, where are we? We are at 101. Let me take another 5 minutes and talk about how we know that this is an innovation from the Hebrew Bible. There are lots of examples in which we bless God, or people in the Hebrew Bible bless God. Okay, in an expression like "Blessed be God." Okay, Abraham's servant says, "Blessed be God." When he goes to, he tries to, he's negotiating for Rebecca, and he says, "Praise God, I found her," or something like that. So he says that. Jethro, who is Moses's father-in-law, when he comes after Sinai and he comes to visit Moses and brings Moses's kids and wife, who the kids disappear forever, But Jethro says, "Blessed be God." Wow, God did all of that. Wow, blessed be God. All right. Joshua says, "Blessed be God." David says, "Blessed be God." Solomon, in that dedication, when Solomon does that blessing before and after all those petitions, and he blesses the people. We looked at that. Solomon says, "Blessed be God." I can go back to that page and remind you of that. Okay, let's do that. Here it is. Ah! When I have this open, it's quite hard. It's slow. My computer is very slow. But this is the wording of those two blessings. Solomon turns around, so that's his change in stance, and he changes it again after the blessing, okay? And he says, "Praised be God, praised be Adonai, the God of Israel, who has fulfilled these promises." And so this is a very specific, timely prayer, because building the temple and allowing him to build the temple fulfills God's promise. Okay, and the other promises he talks about are promises of, I'll have to see, I don't remember exactly. And then afterwards, what is this? Again, he is blessing the congregation of Israel. He blesses the congregation of Israel by praising God, or blessing God. "Blessed be Adonai, who has granted a haven to God's people Israel, just as God promised. Not a single word has failed of all of the gracious promises that God made through God's servant Moses." Okay, so this is not Baruch Atah Adonai. He is not blessing God. He's not saying, "Praised are you, God." He's blessing God. Okay, so that's the point. Okay, and we have other places in the Hebrew Bible where people bless God's name, and almost always when there are places in the Hebrew Bible where people bless God's name, they say forever. "Blessed be God's name forever and ever. Le'olam va'ed." Okay, Lidor vador, Le'olam va'ed. And you can find it in the Psalms. You can find, okay, these pieces are not in the Hebrew Bible, but these are sources that we're going to talk about that are late Second Temple period places, okay? So what we get inserted into the Shema is, "Blessed be God's name with the kingdom, Malchuto, forever." Okay, "Blessed be the name of God's glorious kingship forever and ever." And at the very beginning, I told you that Kimmelman, the professor at Brandeis, has written a lot about this, and he's the one who traced all of these connections and makes the point about how innovative, how new it was that here's what's new. I think I have this. Let's see what this is. Okay, this is the point where we'll end. Okay, this is the point to sum up this point. Okay, we haven't said why it was inserted into the Shema yet, but we will. And what Kimmelman is saying about it is that God is not referred to as king generally. God is not referred to as king in the Hebrew Bible as a whole. It doesn't happen very often that God is referred to as the king. It's not surprising that it doesn't happen, because the Davidic line is in place during the Hebrew Bible, okay? There are descendants of David who are the kings. And so the idea that God is the King of Kings is not a Hebrew Bible notion. It comes later, okay? And the point that Kimmelman is making is that referring to God's name blessing God's name, praising God's name that we do. You know, there's another place where we say it a lot when we pause and they're in saying the Amida, or when we go back and the prayer leader is saying a blessing, there's a pause. After Baruch Atah Adonai, there's a pause, and everybody in the congregation responds, or some do, or there's a tradition of it, saying Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. Okay, if you don't say it, this is something we're going to say. What does that mean? Baruch Hu, praised be God, praised be Him, Baruch Shemo, and praise His name. So we are constantly inserting praising God and praising God's name. Okay? And there's an even shorter version of it. You can cut the Baruch Hu part and just say Baruch Shemo. So when the prayer leader is repeating the Amida and he says Baruch Atah Adonai, and people say Baruch Shemo, that's what our response is. So we're praising God's name. So God's name is praised often in the Hebrew Bible, but not in places where kingship, the concept of kingship occurs, and in other places in early blessing formulas, and I'm going to talk next time about what it means. Where do we have these early blessing formulas coming from? Early in this case means 100 or 200 years before and after the temple was destroyed. Okay, that's what we're going to talk about for early blessing formulas, all right? In all of those sources, we get references to God as king, but not where it's also praising God's name or blessing God's name, okay? And we get blessing God's name in a lot of places in these blessings, but not mentioning kingship, okay? And other sources, other early sources, and we're gonna come back to these, I'm gonna talk more about them next time, also tend not to refer to God as king. So referring to God as king and God's kingship seems to be something that started off for the rabbis and became more and more important in rabbinic practice, and is now so infused into what we do when we say blessings. Okay, here we just Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, that becomes normative to us. We just sort of assume that melech goes all the way back, and it does not. So that's where I kind of want to leave things. We have 4 minutes, so I just want to say, okay, please write into the chat or unmute yourselves. Has this been interesting? Has it blown your mind? What captured you? What do you find? What's your takeaway from this?
Davida, it's very interesting, but I just sent you a note. It didn't make clear, because having spent part of my time at Temple Emmanuel in Dallas, I remember every day saying the Shema and adding the second line.
Okay.
So I'm curious, is that all about the kingship that the Reform conservative fight for?
It's probably not because of their ideology. It's probably they don't see any reason not to. So there's conflict over why it got said silently and why it got said aloud. It's controversial. And so there were different groups apparently during the early part of the development of the Siddur, where some groups would always say it out loud and some groups would only whisper it. And so when it sort of got finalized, they said, okay, say it silently. It's not, the rabbis are in favor of people saying it, but not saying it always out loud. And there's a lot of the oral private distinction that, okay, that was,
Thanks.
So it's not like you are sinning if you say it out loud, but there are reasons, partly because it is, the insertion is the key part. The fact that they even bothered to insert it after the Shema and before the V'ahavta, that is the surprising and striking thing, that they interrupted this passage from these pieces of the Shema that are recreating what we think went on when the temple was standing. Okay, so that's the main thing, is if the Shema was being said on a routine basis, it was not being interrupted by that phrase. Okay. It was not being interrupted by Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed in the temple. Okay.
Okay.
That's
Thank you.
the thing. Okay. Why are our services over 2 hours long? That is the $64 million question. My overall takeaway from this is the Siddur got fixed in place late, very late in our history. And when halacha became frozen, okay, when the Shulchan Aruch, and this is late 15th century, and said, okay, we're following halacha. Halacha says this is what we do in our prayer services, blah, blah, blah. Things only got added, and they almost never got taken away. There was one period in the 18th century where some things got dropped out, but since the 18th century, things have only been added. And, I think that there are a lot of places where there's a requirement that we say a blessing, but the wording that goes around the blessing just grew. So I'm not in favor of having 3 hours. Okay, so it's okay. What else? The term king is, and it's really interesting what has happened to the whole kingship thing, also because king is gendered, right? And ever since, since the 70s, we are sort of worried about saying king instead of sovereign or monarch, because, saying king means that God is male. So there's a lot around this where kingship has kind of gone away. Yes, and Sigrid, you are totally right. From, if people in our synagogue go on to the rabbinate, like Alex, weather forecasts are now going to be part of the Siddur for everybody. All right, thank you all for coming. It is 1:15. We will continue. We'll go back and look closer at this next time. That's what we'll do next time. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Davida.
Okay, bye.
Bye.